Commentator and Washington correspondent for The New Yorker, Ryan Lizza, Jennifer Steinauer of The New York Times, and BuzzFeed's Washington bureau chief, John Stanton. Easy for me to say, John. All right. You know, maybe I'm a sucker, but I actually want to believe what those senators said, that things are going to get better in 2014. You guys are Hill rats. You cover Congress. You walk around and, you know, the halls like I do. Jen, let me start with you. What do you think? Are you going to poke a hole in our optimistic bubble?
Number one. Well, I thought one of the most interesting things that happened at the end of the year, and really one of the most interesting things that's happened since Republicans took the House in 2010, was John Boehner standing up, as you remember, Dana, you were there, and denouncing some of the right-leaning outside groups that have been pressuring members to vote certain ways, to bring down bills, to bring down compromise bills that a lot of people, even in the party, had been supporting. I think that could presage a different era. On the other hand, at that same time, we saw over at the Senate the right-leaning senators, particularly those who are up for re-election, really pushing back against, for example, the budget deal. So I think that'll be the interesting dynamic to watch.
I think that, the budget deal allows them a little bit of space to do some things that there is bipartisan agreement. If you look at sexual assault in the military, Kirsten Gillibrand on one side was able to put together a very bipartisan group, while Claire McCaskill on the other side was able to put together her own. On immigration, there's a potential for that. And there are a number of issues where the drone, things like that, where there are possibilities for this. Getting these big budget issues out of the way, I think, does make it possible.
God, this is such an optimistic group. Ryan?
There was some pessimism about.
Oh, Debbie Downer,
I think,
here he
the
is.
Senate, it started on a pretty good note, right? That during the lame duck in 2012, Biden and McConnell came to an agreement. They passed bipartisan immigration reform by a huge majority. But as the year wore on, and as a lot of the Republican senators started to draw primary opponents and really started to worry about their 2014 races, the Senate descended into a lot more, look like a lot more like the House, and ended with this big sort of ugly fight over the so-called nuclear option. So I think it's very tough to see what's going to come out of the Senate on a bipartisan basis here next year, given all the primary challenges.
With the role reversal.
On the House side, it looks like Boehner sort of broke the back of that opposition in his own party by the end of the year, and maybe there's a chance for some stuff to come out of the House. Let's
drill down on some of the big things that we're going to all be covering in a week, I guess, when Congress comes back. First of all, a minimum wage increase. That's the #1 agenda item in the Senate. And then longer term, February, a debt ceiling increase. And then you mentioned immigration reform passed the Senate, but the House, if you believe John Boehner, is going to take up this in some way, shape, or form, probably in small or bite-sized chunks. Do you think, I mean, you mentioned John Boehner, Jen. Do you think that the fact that he pushed back against these conservative groups is going to make it easier for him to get immigration passed, which is something that Republicans and the quote-unquote establishment think that they need to do to pull back Latinos into the fold? I
think that is possible, but I also don't think that that translates into an aggressive legislative agenda. And I do think that the continued fight over Obamacare continues to be a wild card in this dynamic. Now that we have 2 million people registered, do Republicans continue to push for repeal, or do they continue to push this agenda of oversight? Does that agenda sort of put in the shadows their legislative agenda, particularly at a time when people are trying to get reelected? I don't know that that's necessarily the case.
And Ryan, it is a wild card. Obamacare, that is basically the entire Republican playbook.
That's not going to go away, and the Republicans have to make a decision about that. If the technical issues on the website get better, they have to decide: are they still the party of repeal, or are they the party of trying to tweak it and fix the laws? Fix it or repeal it. On immigration reform, the one Republican in the House that proved to have credibility with the right and the ability to sort of unlock a bipartisan deal was Paul Ryan. And he seems to be the one guy on the House side and the Republican side that could perhaps put together a bipartisan deal on immigration reform in the House.
Yeah, no, I think he's the guy that we have to watch on that issue. I think that minimum wage is going to be for Democrats what Obamacare is for Republicans. I mean, there's no chance that the House is going to do anything on that issue, but Democrats are going to use this to sort of demagogue and beat them up, just like Republicans use Obamacare as a great sort of political rallying cry. Immigration is that one spot. If Paul Ryan is able to duplicate what he did with the budget deal, you could actually see a substantial change to immigration laws in this country. I think that, Boehner's trying to find a way to give him some space to do that.
Yeah. Like all these issues on the Republican Party, he has to be willing to lose quite a few Republican votes and bring in Democrats, and that's the difficulty.
Which he wasn't before, but now it looks like he is. Just real quick, obviously 2014 is an election year. You mentioned the Senate. That's where all of our eyes are going to be, because the Republicans need 6 seats. They need to bring back 6 seats in order to take control of the Senate. such a fascinating story because the dynamic, just like it was the past 2 years, first and foremost is, will some of these Republicans get beaten from within their own party, right? And then will they hold on to their seats? What are the races that you're going to be watching, Jen?
Well, it's just so interesting because when you sit there and start to do the math, you get 1, 2, 3, 4 seats. You can come up with those off the bat where Republicans look to have a lot of place to move. But it's always that 5th and 6th seat, right, that is in question. When you look at something like, it's very hard for me to understand, sitting here with you today on New Year's Eve, how Democrats, for example, succeed in Georgia. But then you start to look back on the McCaskill race, and you wonder if that's a possibility. So those are strange races that you are loath to try and predict right now.
And the past 2 election cycles, Republicans felt really confident, and Democrats were really worried. And it turned out Republicans couldn't seal the deal.
Well, they have a couple problems right now on the primary side with Kansas, Mississippi, a couple places where they have members that are being primaried, and they have very serious challenges. You know, these are older members. They have not had to run a real race in some cases decades, and they're now looking at somebody who's really coming at them. And that's going to be, I think, a very fascinating thing, at least in the short term in this election.
The thing I'm going to look for is the Obama years have been basically a tale of 2 electorates. In the presidential years, 2008 and 2012, big outpouring of young voters, non-white voters, new voters that Obama brought into the system. Those voters did not show up in 2010. And can the Obama machine that helped him win re-election, can he overcome the normal advantage that Republicans will have in a midterm and get some of those new voters out and help the Democrats
That will be fascinating to watch. And I just want to say for the record that I'm glad to see you all on New Year's Eve, but I'm also glad that we are not in Congress as we were last year and the year before and the year before that. There are no cliffs, there are no deadlines, nothing. So thank you all. Enjoy your New Year's Eve.